Alright everyone, it's time to play some Affinity, and I won the die roll, so I'm going to play first. Alright, Springleaf Drum to accelerate is always a good sign. It's not the fastest start because I don't have a 0 drop, but this looks pretty nice with the turn 2 Arcbound Ravager, and then some late game cards in Thoughtcast and Master of Ethereum, so I'm not gonna mulligan this. It's not like I said, not the fastest, no Mox Opal or anything like that, but it's still fine. Now, I don't really need the signal pest in play. It's not going to do anything for me that early. So I could start with Springleaf Drum, and then I'm safe from a turn 1 removal spell. Can always go turn 2 Ravager, and then use the mana from the Ravager to cast Signal Pest. That way my opponent is not able to bolt something here immediately. Of course, this changes now that there is an untapped mana, which does mean that I'm going to want to run out Signal Pass so that that is in play when I get the Ravager. Now, this signals not only Lightning Bolt but also Spell Pierce, and I could play around that by casting Thoughtcast. On the other hand, it's quite important for me to get the Ravager into play, and I will be able to cast Thoughtcast once Massive Ethereum resolves. So I'm actually willing to let my opponent Spell Pierce here if he has it, simply because Spell Pierce will always hit something good in my deck. Alright, this is the Lightning Bolt, and I'm not going to sacrifice everything I have, so I'm just fine with creating a larger Signal Pest. It's not great to get to lose the Arcbound Ravager here, but it's also not the end of the world. I could be playing against Twin here. Is it Charm? Alright. But it's kind of tough to say right now. So this should be exactly enough. Oh, I should add a blue. This is my 3rd artifact, 4th artifact, and then I'm thought casting for a blue. And I even get a Memnite, which I'm just gonna run out. It pumps Massive Ethereum, and it's a 2/2 on its own, so there's no reason to hold it back. Alright, green mana means Tarmogoyfs, but it's probably still the combo version of Twin. Alright, I do a Cranial Plating, which is of course great. I might be dead here to the combo, which I can't do much about. Just gonna run out the plating. I'm also not going to represent anything. Alright, Snapcaster Mage on Lightning Bolt. That's not too scary. Alright, so the mass is already pretty huge. If I put Cranial Plating on either of my guys, it's going to mean that it's getting bolted, and I can't hold it back and still have the instant equip available. So what I'm going to do is instead attack with everything, and if my opponent then Lightning Bolt, I can instant equip, basically forcing my opponent not to use the Lightning Bolt in this spot. And also forcing the chump block still, so I'm gonna pass here, because I can't deal any extra damage. Would I equip the plating to either of my creatures? Oh wow. This is very aggressive by my opponent. Don't think that's a great line here, taking so much extra damage from the unblocked creature. And I win. Alright, that was easy enough. And I still suspect that I'm up against some kind of tempo Twin variant that happens to have Snapcasters and potentially Goyfs as well. So clearly I need ways to interact with the combo, and that's given by Galvanic Blast, Thoughtseize, maybe Spell Pierce is an option. I don't generally try to kill Spellskites with Ancient Grudges, especially not against a version that's also going for Tarmogoyfs. Grafdigger's Cage, of course, not for this matchup. Relic is fine against Snapcaster, if I know that they're now going for the control route. So the twin variants that Patrick Dickmann popularized basically turn into a full control deck after boarding. But I can't be sure if that's the case for my opponent. So I kind of have to hedge my bets and have a little bit of everything. One card that's quite dangerous is Steel Overseer because it dies to so many spells, and it also gets electrolyzed. So Steel Overseer is kind of a bad card because blue-red will always have ways to deal with it. I need the Torpor Orb, I need the Spell Skies against the combo, I need Edge Champion against Tarmogoyf, and if I'm suspecting that my opponent will be trying to beat down with Tarmogoyfs, and then I want Galvanic Blast and 2 Thoughtseize to disrupt the combo plan. I'm not going to run Spell Pierce. Well, let's see. I could run Spell Pierce, but only if I see a nice window for that. I'm not going to run the Steel Overseers, and then Welding Jar gets a lot weaker as well. So I do need most of my early drops to have good mana, otherwise my Springleaf Drum becomes almost useless. I could take out at least one Mass of Ethereum because after boarding I expect more removal, so I can definitely do without one of these. And then it's getting pretty close. Probably a Memnite because I know that I'm up against the version that is prone to have more ground creatures than usual. So I'm gonna go like this. This is probably the least aggressive that I can go after boarding, and on the play I'm gonna be a bit more proactive, maybe even bring in the Steel Overseers again. This is also the game. Game 2 is the game where I get to see what my opponent is up to more clearly, and then I can play accordingly. I'm gonna keep this hand. It is missing one of the big beaters, but I'm accelerating with Mox Opal, which is huge. And I can draw into anything. I can draw into one of my 4 Thought Casts or one of the larger guys, and without trouble. So let's see what happens here. All right, land. I kind of just want to run out everything I have. I could cast Springleaf Drum because it'll automatically generate a mana. I'm getting Inkmoth Nexus into play, not that that's a big deal. And I can also cast Spell Skite. Now, I am losing one of my creatures to Lightning Bolt. If my opponent wants to do that, it's not even clear if that's a good plan on my opponent's side. But if that's something that my opponent wants to do, I'm gonna allow it in the sense that it's gonna be Memnite. I don't want my evasive creatures to be subjected to removal. And if it's really Lightning Bolt here, then the Memnite has to be bolted. Otherwise, I start protecting it with Spell Skite. I'm also just running out everything I have. I need to draw Massive Ethereum or one of my cards to make my guys better anyway. The big danger with this deck with Affinity is that you just ran out of steam, and my hand was a bit dangerous in that regard. I think the power of Spellskite makes it possible to keep it, but I need to draw Ravager, Plating, one of my other 3 drops, or yeah, that's pretty much it. Ravager, Plating, or one of my 3 drops. Explosives for 0. That's not good, but what can you do? So it looks like I'm playing against a control version now. And like I said, this is going to be good to know. So this would cost 3. I can animate the Inkmoth Nexus, and it will still cost effectively 3 because I use one of my mana to activate the Inkmoth Nexus. But sometimes it makes a difference if you, for example, draw into another Thought Cast and a Mox Opal, then you would have the required mana to cast it. And if you hadn't animated Inkmoth Nexus first, then you simply wouldn't. So that's why I tend to always do it unless there is a reason not to. on my opponent's side. So this Spell's Guide is not looking amazing, but the Galvanic Blast I drew does mean that things are a bit more safe now. But it really depends on my opponent's game plan. If there's Tarmogoyfs and other beatsticks, then it's definitely going to be a bit problematic. I'm losing my Glimmer Void here, which sucks, of course. And Blinkmoth Nexus. So I'm just gonna run out the Blinkmoth and get in for 1 poison. I don't want to expose my Glimmer Void to more artifact removal. And I'm getting in for a point of poison. Alright, Sakura Tribal. So my opponent might actually not be on Twin. I had a suspicion that could be the case. But thus far, all the cards I had seen were cards that I was expecting in Twin as well. Now Sakura Tribal is the first card that I'm seeing that doesn't really fit the bill here. So maybe a Scapeshift variant. That would be my best guess. I don't really usually see Sakura Tribelder. The Scapeshift decks usually ramp a lot more than what my opponent has been doing here. So I'm really not sure. I'm happy that I'm on 20 though. That has to be good. Now that Torpor Orb might be just completely worthless. I think I still cast it just because I can. Question is, do I cast it before attacking? Now, depending on what my opponent is on, I'm actually running into Cryptic Command here. So my opponent is on 3 cards and has had this weird Sakura Tribelder. So maybe he isn't on Twin. Sakura Tribelder is not a Twin card, definitely. So if I want to beat Scapeshift or some weird blue red green control deck, then I shouldn't worry about casting Torpor Orb or holding up mana for Galvanic Blast. I should be worrying about getting in with Inkmoth Nexus, and that's just what I'm going to do. If I lose to the combo here, I'm fine with it, and that way at least I will not allow my opponent to counter draw something. Let's see, maybe a Snapcaster Mage, Flashback Lightning Bolt. No, just an Izzet Charm. And a Nature's Claim. So my opponent is just aiming to kill every single artifact that I play. Alright. So I could play Torpor Orb here, but it's more important for me to get Cranial Plating in play. To start attacking with Blinkmoth Nexus. Of course, I now can't really play around Cryptic Command anymore. And it is a Cryptic Command. Alright. And like I said, everything that's happening now is pretty much me learning about what my opponent is up to. So even if I lose the game, I will be able to sideboard much better. And also play better because I know what's going to happen. Or at least I will have a vague idea of what's going to happen. Alright, I'm not gonna try to play around anything anymore. I have nothing to pressure my opponent, and I'm not even sure if the Galvanic Blast will do me any good, so... It looks like I'm getting Cryptic again. So my opponent on the all removal and Cryptic Command plan. This might be the time for Scapeshift if that's what my opponent wants to do. Let's see if I deal 1 point here. Alright, I have my opponent down to 2 cards and I have no information about what's really going on. Of course, I might just die out of nowhere to Scapeshift for 8 on 24 Live. But that's pretty much all I have. And because I haven't seen much 2-for-1 removal, except for the Ancient Grudge, of course, I think I'm going to bring in the Steel Overseers on the play. They are great against the damage-based removal. They allow me to maybe lure out Engineered Explosive a bit earlier, or for less effect. So, yeah, I'm just really curious to see what's going to unfold here. Maybe this is a spell that's actually relevant. No, it's a Secure Trap Elder. This would give my opponent the 8th land. This could be it. Let's see. Yep, looks like Scapeshift is happening. Let's see. Opponent sacrifices everything, gets 2 Valakuts and 6 mountains, and then I'm dead. I'll just let him play it out and then concede. Alright, this is exactly 6. This is 12 triggers times 3, so my opponent deals 36 here. I can just concede. Alright, completely misboarded because I was thinking that I was up against Twin, which I wasn't. So I'm not sure about, well, the first thing is that Galvanic Blast is a lot weaker, and I have to be a lot less scared of my opponent's combo, because Scapeshift is, the problem with Scapeshift is not that they combo at some point, but the problem with Scapeshift is that they just basically play control against me, and then at some point I'm in trouble. Now, Spells Guide is actually kind of fun. You can activate it for 2 life to prevent 3 to you, so you basically reduce the Scapeshift combo by 1 point, and that could actually be relevant from time to time. However, on the play, I think that I'm better off just trying to be as aggressive as possible. And one thing I might do is try to Spell Pierce or Unified Will, some of the things that my opponent is trying, just to mess with my opponent's plan a little bit. I'm also going to be very aggressive with the Steel Overseers, just bring in everything and try to activate it at least once, which should be huge. I want maybe these cards in the deck. I could also see bringing back Welding Jar as a good way to protect from the 1/1 removal that my opponent is packing. So Welding Jar, definitely another consideration. Now, it's possible that Signal Pass is now the weakest card in my deck, because I'm facing a matchup where my opponent is just trying to kill everything I have. So the Signal Pass is not doing anything, and different from Ornithopter, it costs 1, which makes a huge difference in how explosive my draws are, and if I'm able to cast my thought seizes and so on. So I'm just gonna run 0 Signal Pasts for game 3 and see how this blue-black build works. Alright, I'm gonna play first. I have a Mox Opal together with a Memnite, but no 3rd artifact. Now, Blinkmoth Nexus activates for 1 colorless, so I could actually just fire off the Thoughtseize, but then I won't have the mana to cast Arcbound Ravager, and that's really dangerous. If my opponent just Lightning Bolts the Memnite, then I'm dead. So I have to mulligan this hand. It just doesn't have enough mana, and this hand is clearly not keepable either. I could run out 2 Ornithopters, and that's it. My opponent also going down to 6, and I'm going down to 5. Wow. This hand isn't great, but I'm gonna keep it. So, could start with Vault Scourge to start pressuring my opponent at least a little bit. It is in most danger of just dying immediately. So the problem is I kind of need to draw a land to cast the Ravager anyway. And because I'm in such a bad position, I'm just going to try to run out the Vault Scourge, hoping that my opponent isn't going to kill it on turn 1 immediately. The one way this is getting punished is if my opponent has a removal spell for Vault Scourge, and I draw a 0-drop that would have enabled me to cast the Ravager. And I actually drew something that just allows me to cast the Ravager. And here it's much more important to get Springleaf Drum into play than to deal 1 damage with Vault Scourge. So I'm just emptying my hand, basically. Now, Search for Tomorrow still needs 1 more turn, and I'm not dead to... I wouldn't have been dead to an Explosives for 2 or anything like that. So here, I'm just happy making my Vault Scourge a 2/2, not that I have much choice, but I definitely want the Nature's Claim to resolve. And this is tapped, which is nice. And I drew a Master of Ethereum, so could run out the Master. My opponent will have 4 mana next turn. Casting Thoughtcast is kind of expensive. I have 3 artifacts, I could animate the Nexus, but still Thoughtcast would effectively cost 2, and it would also mean that I have to tap the Vault Scourge. If I'm tapping the Vault Scourge, I want it to be for something good, and that's Massive Ethereum. Now, I'm never beating Creeping Corrosion at this stage, not after Mulligan to 5, and Search for Tomorrow Nature's Claim started, so I'm not even going to try to play around that. Casting Thoughtcast would have been the better line against Creeping Corrosion, but to be honest, I don't think that I'm beating that card, so I'm just not trying. I still have some interesting decisions coming up here, and that's mostly related to the Thoughtcast and the fact that my opponent might actually have Cryptic Command mana next turn. So if I just see an untapped land go, I have to prepare for Cryptic Command, and that means casting Thoughtcast is very dangerous, but I also can't probably attack with everything. So yeah, it is not Cryptic Command though. It's just Nature's Claim on Master of Ethereum. And I'm up to 26. Ornithopter is actually a good draw. It costs 0, so there's no downside to just playing it here. And it'll allow me to draw some cards. This is Cranial Plating, so I would love to just have the plating and equip it immediately, but my opponent has mana up, and I have several threats and little mana, so I'm just going to try to resolve this here. Could have attacked with Vault Scourge first to test the waters to see if my opponent lightning bolts, but I think the way my opponent has been playing, early removal spells would have already been cast by now. So let's see what's happening here. This plating might make the difference. Search for Tomorrow is getting suspended. This looks like a Cryptic Command once again. Why would you suspend Search for Tomorrow? It only makes sense if you want to hold up 4 mana, I think. Alright, Darkseer Citadel is actually not great because I wanted to have a second black source, so Glimmer Void would have been a lot better. I can equip Cranial Plating to Ornithopter and just try to get in there. That way my opponent will have to potentially just tap my creatures. That would make the most sense. And that could mean that I get to sneak in for 1 point of damage with Inkmoth Nexus, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it can make the difference between being able to attack for lethal next turn. So I'm not going to animate Inkmoth Nexus beforehand, but rather see what happens when I just equip the Ornithopter. And I am running out this. I'm holding back the second Ornithopter for now. Let's see. Yeah, and I'm holding that back because of Cryptic Command. I don't think that my opponent would necessarily Cryptic it, but if I'm getting through with these guys, I'm super happy. So I'm also not equipping the Vault Scourge because I have very little hope that this attack is actually getting through. And that way I'm safe from, well, I'm safer from removal spells, from simple removal spells like Lightning Bolt. If I put the Cranial Plating on the Vault Scourge, I deal 0 this turn. But if I put the Cranial Plating on Ornithopter, it's a different story. So the modes are actually also interesting. So it's tap all creatures and draw a card. Now I can add a mana. Let this resolve. Animate Inkmoth Nexus. Get in for a point of damage, a point of poison. And now the question is, do I run out Ornithopter or not? The fact that I can equip it is kind of nice. If my opponent has explosives for 0, I don't think I mind. And the additional artifact could matter, so I'm gonna run it out. This is my 8th artifact, so now Inkmoth Nexus would be lethal. If nothing happens, if absolutely nothing happens. Alright, I'm happy that this is still on 1 counter. I'm not going to die this turn, at least. And a great draw would be Glimmer Void at this stage. This attack is actually interesting. I could just block it, to be honest. Losing my Ornithopter wouldn't be horrible, but I want to keep 7 artifacts so that I can threaten lethal with Inkmoth Nexus. I think that's more important than staying on 26 as opposed to 24. Also, if I block with Ornithopter, my opponent just kills Cranial Plating. I'm also in a very bad spot. I would be in a bad spot anyway, but it would be pretty much unbeatable then. So yeah, let's see what happens here. Alright, an untapped Steam Vents. My opponent going down to 13. Now with 6 open mana. Could just be a flashback Cryptic Command. In my upkeep, my opponent is not doing anything. So I have a Steel Overseer. I don't have enough mana to animate Inkmoth Nexus and equip it. That's my main problem here. And I do need to play around Cryptic Command in a sense. My opponent might just be bluffing it. So if I animate Inkmoth Nexus and then try to equip Plating, I'm not really getting where I want to be. So because if I do that, if I animate the Nexus and equip the Plating, I go to combat, my opponent taps everything I have, and then I'm unable to cast the Steel Overseer. Now, if I cast the Steel Overseer, my opponent might still choose to tap all my creatures, but then he isn't drawing a card from the Cryptic Command. So that sounds like a much fairer deal. I'm gonna try that. Let's see if the Steel Overseer resolves, and then I can make another plan. I'm not going for the kill here with Inkmoth. And that might actually be a good bluff here, if my opponent is only holding Scapeshift, for example. It's not clear how my opponent is going to react to a Steel Overseer. If my read is correct that there is a Cryptic Command waiting, a flashback Cryptic Command, then countering Steel Overseer, drawing a card would be reasonable, but then I gain extra life with equipping Vault Scourge. So bouncing one of my permanents would be an option, but then tapping my creatures is probably just the safer line. And there's the Snapcaster Mage, targeting Cryptic Command, of course. And now the real question is, which modes does my opponent choose? Counter target spell, draw a card. Alright, interesting. So probably just searching for ways to win the game. I'm going to animate Inkmoth just to deal an extra point of damage, and I'm bringing my opponent down to 3. So that's a great turn for me. I didn't expect the Cryptic to be played that way, to be honest. I might still be dying here, but I'm on 34, so my opponent needs a a huge Scapeshift and can't take another hit from the Vault Scourge. Would have been great to deal one additional point of damage here at some point, but I didn't. So, all right, I win the match. It's always unclear with Affinity. You're just the proactive deck, and you have to try to make the most out of these spots. And despite claim, Snapcaster claim, cryptic, Snapcaster cryptic, my opponent just concedes here because I have, well, basically 2.5 lethal threats on the board. All right, great match, great game. Up for round 2 then.